So it's our 10th episode today, and this time we have a very special guest here in the studio with us, Stephen Clark. Stephen is a director for the European Parliament liaison offices. Hi, Stephen.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Are you enjoying Tallinn so far?
I am. I've been here since Wednesday. I've been kept very busy going around the city, doing lots of things, but they're interesting things to do, and the city looks beautiful. It's the third time I've been here, so I've seen it in June, I've seen it in December, where we had about 3 hours daylight, if I recall, and this time.
All right. Before we start, we're going to play a little game, and Brit is going to do an introduction for you.
Yeah, so it's a little warm-up. We will ask you easy questions about you, and you have to answer with the first thing that comes into your mind. Sounds good?
Okay.
So let's begin. The first question is, what was your favorite TV show or movie as a kid?
Star Trek.
Ooh.
The first generation, of course. Captain Kirk.
Would you rather be a fast reader or a fast writer?
I'd like to be a fast writer.
Why?
Because I write quite a lot, and it takes me a lot of time. And sometimes I think, if only this could go a bit faster.
Okay.
Would you rather lose your teenage memories or your college memories?
Ooh, if I had to choose them, I'd lose my teenage memories because college memories are so good.
What role do you best fit into on a team?
On a team, I don't necessarily want to be the numero uno, the leader, but I like to be helping to decide things and move things along. So I like to be the ideas person if I can.
Okay.
All right. If you could acquire any superpower, which one would you like to have and why?
Oh, I always imagined as a kid that I could be invisible. I think everyone wants that one, right? Does everyone say that, I guess, when you ask that question?
What's your favorite word in English and why?
My favorite word? Oh, God. People tell me I use the word notwithstanding too much. One of my I think, personal failings is I tend to be one of these people who sees both sides of the argument, which means half the time I can't make up my mind about anything. So I'll say one thing and then I say, well, notwithstanding, and then give the opposite point of view. So it's very frustrating for everyone else, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's talk about food. What toppings would you put into your ideal pizza?
Toppings are olives, cooked ham, and that's it, really.
Oh,
With
simple.
mozzarella and tomato,
Yeah,
of course, always.
All right.
A famous question, does pineapple go on the pizza or not?
Pineapple, absolutely not. Sorry, I am
I
also
agree.
Italian. So, no, I spend a lot of my time in Italy, and that's just a big no-no, absolutely. And I went to a pizzeria here in Tallinn, I'm afraid almost all the pizzas had pineapple on them. It was an outrage.
If we speak about vacation, would you like to go to beach, a safari, or a forest one?
I'd love to go on a safari. I've never done that, but I think I'd love it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the most beautiful place on Earth? Whether you have been there or whether you want to go?
I've always seen these pictures of tropical islands with perfect white beaches and sort of palm trees, and so I've never been to one of those. I think I might like that. The most beautiful city in the world is Rome. I love it there. It's a bit dirty, but it's a beautiful city.
You traveled a lot, obviously.
I lived in Rome for a while. Actually,
Okay,
as well,
so have you counted how many flights have you taken so far, or how many flights do you take in a year?
I have to plead the Fifth Amendment on that one, because in these days of climate change and so on, I've flown a lot around Europe, it's true. I haven't traveled very much outside Europe. United States a few times, but all European countries, it's my job as well. I have to get around quite a lot.
Okay.
Do you have any hidden talents? What can you do?
No, I've got no hidden talent. Yeah, my hobby is all to do with films, old films, and I think I wrote a book, but I never published it. So maybe that counts as a hidden talent.
Ooh. So, and the last one, if you won a lottery of 1 billion euros or dollars. What would you do with all the money?
Well, you know, pay off the mortgage and boring things like that to start with. Then, you know, everyone's got, you know, you've got your family, you want to help them out and all that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, actually, I think that would be a huge problem to have to deal with all of that money, and you just end up worrying about it all the time. So, you know, probably get rid of it as quickly as possible.
But let's move forward and talk about your job. You're the director of the European Parliament liaison offices. What does your working day look like, and what are your duties?
Okay, so firstly, it's in communication. It's a communication job. So these offices, we have an office. The European Parliament has an office in every capital city in the European Union. And in the 5 bigger countries, it has a second office as well. So we call it a regional office. And these offices, basically, they do mainly communication work. So it means they have someone who deals with media relations and the press and that kind of thing, someone who deals with public relations, organizing events, conferences, all of those kind of things, social media manager, and you know, all of this is part of a communication strategy of the European Parliament. So to kind of explain what the Parliament does, what it's all about, what the latest news is, and if there's a campaign going on, what the messages are of the European Parliament. And all of these things are fed through the offices. So my job is to kind of try and coordinate that, make sure that everyone has what they need to do their job, and make sure that the job kind of gets done. And you know, the best thing about my job is that I get to travel around from office to office and meet them and see what's happening locally. I mean, that's the whole point of these offices, that it helps the Parliament have a foothold in reality. So we know what's happening everywhere, and we are communicating in a way which is right for everywhere. You know, there's always the danger of a big organisation like the European Parliament that sits in Brussels or Strasbourg, that it sort of it forms a bubble around itself, a sort of mental bubble. And people talk about that. They talk about a bubble. And the offices are one of the main ways that we get out of the bubble. And that's why it's also very satisfying for me as my job to sort of have a different perspective. You know, I'm a Brussels animal. I've been there for a long time. But this means I get out of Brussels and I get to see what happens in Tallinn, for example.
And how long have you been in that position already?
Since 2018.
Okay.
I've been in communication more generally since 2007 in the Parliament, doing different things. So there was a spell in digital communication. So, you know, we at that time was a very exciting time. We, you know, took the Parliament for the first time onto social media, which was sort of radical in 2008. Very exciting to have a Facebook page, you know. And after that, I got more into sort of PR and visiting facilities of the Parliament. So we have a big visitor program, and we have these facilities like a visitor centre, which was set up again around this time, and we've started opening them. Actually, the job goes on because we're opening visitor facilities in the capitals of the member states now. So we have one in Tallinn, for example, the Europa Experience. So that was another job. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I've also been heavily involved in the campaigns of the Parliament, particularly ahead of European elections. We like to get out and encourage people to vote, participate, and of course that's a big communication campaign which has to be coordinated, and I've been handling that, which has been a challenge, but it's also been very exciting and very rewarding in the end.
You talked about the benefits. You said that you can travel a lot, but what are the most challenging part of this job?
Well, you know, you can't, if I can say this, the amount of trouble that can be generated by like 32 separate offices spread all over the place is, you know, there are problems always coming up. Something has to be dealt with. It could be something practical, like something to do with the building. It could be something to do with a staffing issue. It could be, or a sort of a more operational issue, you know. And we also, of course, we have to manage our relations with the members of the Parliament, and, you know, they are often quite demanding and they want things from us, and we have to see whether we can provide them, you know, whether it's within our remit. So, you know, a lot of day-to-day complexity and sort of little problems to deal with and firefighting. That's the difficult part of it, I would say. It's also, I think, sometimes difficult to reconcile, the needs of the offices where they are with the needs of the Parliament as a sort of an institution wanting to do something in a particular way, whereas people say in Tallinn or in Lisbon or wherever it might be say, well, I don't want to do it that way here because it doesn't work. So we have to find the middle ground. We have to sort of work out how to do it. But that's a complexity, but that's an interesting complexity.
Okay.
You're here because of the European Parliament EPAS regional seminar of the Partner School program. Tell us more about the program.
Yeah, so this, we call it EPAS because that's just the easy thing to say, European Parliament Ambassador School Programs. It's a bit of a mouthful if you have to say the whole thing. It's actually one of our best programs. We kind of love it because it works really well. Maybe even better than we expected when it was set up, which was before my time. But I came into this job and found it there, and everybody, wherever I go, they say, this is one of the things that works best. And what it is, it's a program where schools can sort of enter into a partnership with our local office, and through the office with the Parliament, and they sort of make certain undertakings to sort of teach some classes about European, the European Union system. So the students get to know a bit about it. They have to organize an activity specifically around Europe Day. But in return for that, we offer materials, so sort of learning materials about the EU and about the European Parliament. And when we organize activities, and these are various things. I mean, we might organize something in the school, like getting an MEP to show up and maybe give a talk and meet the students. Or maybe it's something outside the school, such as the thing I'm here for now. And this is a new idea that we've just introduced this year, which is to get groups of students and teachers from the schools that are participating, obviously not all of them, but the ones that sort of were selected or were able to join, and bring them together from, in this case, 4 different countries in Tallinn. So it means the students and teachers get to meet each other. They're sort of in a sort of more international European context, which is eye-opening always. And we're here for a couple of days, and there's lots of activities going on to help the students, both students and teachers, sort of understand a bit better the system, how democracy works in Europe, and how the European Parliament works, and how laws are made, and all of these things, and why it's important to be part of this process. So this is a new thing. This is the second one that we're doing now. But we have for a long time also been inviting groups, both of students and teachers, to Strasbourg and Brussels, so to the sort of headquarters of the European Parliament, to see the machine in operation, and that's always very exciting and interesting for people, I'm sure. So, it's a way in for young people through their schools. But in general, it's voluntary. I mean, the teachers are the ones who sort of put themselves forward. They're not given time. They're not sort of paid anymore to do this. They do it because they're interested, and that's, of course, it's very important that people are engaged. And we're building up over time. So we currently have 1,700 plus schools across Europe involved in this program, and we try to spread out the kinds of schools. So, let's not just have elite schools, but let's have vocational schools. Let's have, all kinds of different schools involved. And then let's try and get them also involved in other activities. So the EPAS program for us is also a way into doing other things. So we invite the schools to participate in competitions, to come to a thing called Euroscholar, which is kind of a youth parliament that we hold regularly in Strasbourg. So groups come from the schools and, they act as MEPs for a day and all of this kind of thing. So anyway, EPAS, it's a great scheme. And just the last thing I'd say, the important thing is I've mentioned it's teachers and students. We call them senior and junior ambassadors. And of course, it's great, it's important the students learn, and that's our principal target audience, if you like. But the teachers' involvement is great because it gives it duration. It means, there is memory in the school and it carries on from year to year. So once a school is in, then it stays in, kind of thing.
And
Sorry, that was a long answer.
It's okay. And you're targeting high schools or younger ones as well?
It's high school level, so and it tends to be the older classes, maybe sort of 16, 17, 18, the final years of school. And there's kind of a reason for that, is because those students are often the ones who are going to vote in the next time round. They're the ones with the sort of greatest interest potentially in understanding the system. We are often told by our partners around Europe that we should take more interest in primary schools. And I think this is true, but it's a question of resources. But I know that some of our offices are reaching out to primary schools as well. And this is all a little bit to do with education about the European Union in Europe, which is a bit thin almost everywhere. And, you know, the one problem that we get all the time, we're told about, we need more education about Europe because people just don't know, they don't understand. And one way that you should be able to provide that is through schools. But often the national curriculum, you know, it teaches people about their local authority, it teaches them about their national government, and then it kind of stops. And it forgets that there's another level as well that people they should know about because they live in this system. So we try to work with education authorities and persuade them that, you know, obviously it's not something we can force anyone to do, but we like to say, look, we can give you help, we can provide material. You really should take an interest in this because it's a part of everyone's lives.
Talking about education, do you think that schools should turn more attention to providing education on public speaking, for example, and entrepreneurship to, you know, give real life skills as well?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm not an education specialist, but I mean, I see that the professional skills that people need when they come out of school or university or whatever they're coming out of are not necessarily what they've learned in school. And things like being able to do a confident presentation or to give a speech in front of a large audience, I think these are now kind of universal professional skills in a sort of a knowledge economy, if I can put it that way. So it is a useful thing to do. But I know that schools do this as well. Even my own sons, when they were at school, I was quite surprised that they had to produce a PowerPoint for the next day's class and go and present it. And I was quite impressed. I thought, well, that's good because that's something that they need to be able to do. And it also helps. It helps condense information, right? If you have to present it that way, it's not just like written out at great length and just every fact you know sort of bunged on a piece of paper. You sort of have to structure it a bit more, and I think that's an important mental discipline. So the answer to that question is yes.
In your opinion, what is the most valuable thing about volunteering?
Volunteering, I think, okay, this is going to sound a bit grand, but you know, we all live in a society, in a world, and you know, we all get something from that, and I think it's important that we try and give something back to it. It's part of almost like a civic education that, you know, if you're in a society such as ours, you have all kinds of rights and you have various protections, but you also have responsibilities. And volunteering is one way that you can kind of express that. And, you know, it's also something which I think it's just good for, you know, one's own personal development because you meet people, you know, you meet people in a different context. It's a way of working with people before you're sort of forced to by taking a job and sort of being put in an office or being put in time. You know, you can sort of meet people. You might actually, you know, meet girls or whatever it might be if you're a guy, and it's just fun. It can be a rewarding experience, if you see what I mean. You get satisfactions out of doing it.
Do you think that every young person should be at least once a volunteer in her or his life, and why? Yeah,
I think so. But I think that sounds a very sort of structured thing, like, you know, okay, you're going to be a volunteer now. In my experience, it kind of, well, I don't know, it depends, I suppose, where you live and what kind of society you live in, but it comes naturally that people say, you know, oh, come on, we're going to go and clean up the beach today or something, you know, and everyone sort of gets on their sort of waterproofs and goes down the beach and picks up some rubbish or something. And You know, it could happen in a very natural and spontaneous way like that without being sort of super structured. On the other hand, if you want to volunteer in a very structured way, there are all kinds of mechanisms. There's actually a European volunteer system, but there are I think most places have some sort of organized national scheme for volunteering. I know that in the UK there was one where people went off to Africa for 6 months, maybe worked on a development project. Now, I've never done this myself, but I think it's great. And people who've done that kind of thing, they come back and say, wow, this is a life-changing experience. I've seen something completely different. I've done something good with my life. I can feel good about myself. And maybe they actually did do some good as well, you know? So there are different ways. You can be kind of very earnest and structured volunteer, or you can be just a sort of day-to-day volunteer.
Yeah, I think also you get a lot of connections and networking out of the volunteering.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I see, one of the things I see that works differently in different countries is how this is done. In some countries, there are lots of organizations that people join. So youth organizations and so on, or maybe through their colleges or through their schools. And then there's the scouts and things like that. In other places, it tends to be a little more sort of individual, and people like to be individual activists, and very self-motivating, or they might get into sort of a climate change movement or something like that. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you're giving something that you have, your skills, your time, your energy, or whatever, your ideas, and you're doing it for something that you believe in, and that's important as well.
Have you volunteered in your life?
Well, I'm in that category of my world when I was young was full of these things. You know, people were always asking you to do something for a charity. So, you know, oh, we've got a jumble sale. I don't know if that means anything to you. It's where people just bring old stuff and sell it for you know, and all the proceeds go to charity. So I can't count the number of times I was selling stuff, you know, these jumble sales. I came from quite a small community. It's not a big city. I guess it might be different if you're in a big city. And you know, quite a lot of things organized through school or through the local church, all these kind of, everything was kind of, you know, you were there, they knew you were there, so come on, we need you for this. And, you know, I did a lot of that when I was younger.
Okay. What is the biggest lesson you learned from it?
Well, that actually, you know, you may be a bit lazy and think, oh, right, okay, you know, Saturday, I could do something else with my Saturday. But then you go and do it and you have fun and you realize that was actually quite a good day, you know, and you've enjoyed yourself, and you feel satisfied at the end of it. So, yes, it's not a drag. I mean, that's it. It's not something you do as an obligation and as a weight on yourself. It's something you do because it's actually rewarding and fun.
Yeah. Our youth conference offers about 10 to 15 jobs to be a volunteer in our program. Do you think that companies offer many opportunities like this?
Companies?
Or programs or everything.
So I'm not really sure what your question is here. So you're offering people... Sorry, you're going to have to answer that again because I'm not quite sure what you meant.
For example, do schools provide opportunities for youngsters to go out there and try something, to be a volunteer?
Yeah, or
you?
I get you now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What you threw me was the companies bit. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm looking back at my old school days where we sort of, you know, a school often has an interest in being part of the local community. So, you know, they will, and either it can be self-organized by the students or it can be organized by the school itself and say, okay, you know, we want to contribute. And I mentioned tidying up a beach, for example. Well, there are no beaches where I came from, but we would, you know, the local park, there's a lot of litter, so the school would go out there and sort of tidy it up. And that was one thing you could do. It's a very simple and sort of stupid thing. I see that now schools often have systems where they structure work experience programs and things like that. Again, my own sons did this in their school. And, you know, the local companies, this was in Brussels, they would sort of say, okay, we'll take someone for a couple of weeks, they can show them around, they can get an opportunity to see how the job, we'll give them something to do. And that was incredibly rewarding, you know. Maybe it wasn't the most sort of world-shattering job. It wasn't going to change the world, you know, these 2 weeks. But it gave an insight it put you in a different environment. It's a little bit of a challenge to work with people who are maybe older than you, who know what they're doing, and you don't. But, you know, you discover you've got a skill, or you can do something if someone shows you. I think that's great, and that's something I didn't have. It wasn't so common when I was at school. And now I think it's relatively common, at least in places that I know. I mean, here you can tell me better whether this happens. But it's a great idea anyway. And I think local businesses, or businesses in general, have an interest in being part of this. And it's good when it's not just cafes and bars, you know, because, you know, you want something perhaps a little bit more varied than that, to develop different kinds of skills. But, you know, if that can happen, then it's great.
Yeah, I think it becomes more popular, but yeah, when I was young, it wasn't. So
Yeah, same.
But
When you were young, sorry?
yeah, well, when I was like, I think 12 or 15,
Okay,
about that.
right,
Yeah.
10 years back.
Yeah, about
Yeah.
10 years back. But now, yeah, it's definitely becoming more popular.
Yeah.
And parents are also supporting kids to take up summer jobs. And
Yeah. I mean, you can push this too far, you know, when you start to sort of tiger mom syndrome where, you know, you're being forced to do your paper round at 6 a.m. just because your parents think you've got to go and get. Sometimes, you know, you need a break as well. But no, it's good to have these opportunities and to take them up sometimes.
In Estonia, you can vote from the age of 16 in our hometown. What do you think about it? Is it okay or?
Absolutely. I think, okay, European Parliament line to start with. Of course, the more participation there is in the whole process of democracy, the better it is. You know, and 16-year-olds are thinking beings, you know, with ideas, valid ideas, and able to understand sort of political issues. And I see absolutely no problem. I remember when I was 14, thinking, why can't I vote? I have my ideas. I mean, maybe not everyone else agreed with them, but I had my ideas and I wanted to be able to vote for them. And I had to wait like 4 years. So 16 is better than 18, from my point of view. Now, this is local elections, right,
Yeah,
in
local.
Estonia,
Government
but not
is
other
still
elections.
18, yeah.
This is something that is sort of, it's happening here and there in Europe. I see I think Austria was first. They went for 16 generally. And, you know, the world hasn't ended and, you know, politics carries on. But I think also it's good that young people, not only in terms of, they're aware that they have a stake in society, you know? That actually society is telling a young person, you matter to us as well as the other way around. I mean, you know, the politician wants your vote, but society wants to know what you think, and I think that's important.
How should the teenagers decide who to vote for?
Well, I know this can be really hard. All I would say really is that, you know, everyone has their own way of making up their minds, and we know that it's not always, you know, carefully reading the party program, comparing them against each other, trying to work out whether it's going to be cost effective or not. That's not how people operate. But I think what they need to do is try and assess which political party corresponds most closely to their values. I think that's really where, I mean, I've got to be careful. I can't say anything that might sound a bit like I'm pushing people one way or another. Yeah. But I think your affiliation or your sort of association with a given political ideal or party is a question mainly of your personal values and how you think. And look at the people that you're going to vote for and work out, is this someone I trust? Is this someone I think has got their head screwed on the right way? And I would, you know, when something unexpected happens, is this the person I'd like to be having to take the decisions? And that's what it has to be about ultimately.
What do you think about that if someone's relative says that he or she is voting for someone specific? Is it okay to follow, or if you don't know, who are you going to vote for?
I think, you know, if you're 16 and your dad says, well, you know, vote for X, I think what you should answer is, okay, I'm interested, but tell me why. You know, it's important to have your own ideas. Now, of course, many of us, and I think it's actually true in my case as well, I would probably have voted in a similar way to my parents. And maybe that was to do with the kind of family we were, the kind of values we had, and so on. And I think maybe this happens quite naturally. But I think, to answer your question, ask the question back. And don't just sort of take it and say, okay, you know, in this family we've always voted such, and that's that. No, why?
What do you think?
Maybe there's a good reason.
Sorry. What do you think about people who don't vote because they're having a mindset that what does it count if I don't?
Yeah, you know, there's a phrase that it's a bit harsh, but you know, if you don't vote, don't complain afterwards. I think it's, and I mean, it's understandable. I'm not saying I don't understand someone when they say, "Oh, it won't make any difference. It's just me." But you know, it's like everything. If everybody took that view, then we'd all be the victim of the 3 people who decided they were in charge of us. So you know, it's an important principle to be involved. It also means if you vote, it means you have to at least stop and think about it for a second, which means you are thinking about it rather than just ignoring everything. And so really my attitude towards that is, you know, yes, there's something human and understandable about that attitude, but try and overcome it, because voting is more than just one drop in the ocean, as it were. It's also about yourself thinking about things and deciding what you want. And actually that itself is a form of engagement with the system, quite apart from voting, if you see what I mean. So that's the best answer I can come up with to that.
Okay. If our listeners are thinking about having a job, for example, in European Parliament, what would be the aspects they can start paying attention from their early age?
Okay, if we're talking specifically about working in the European Parliament or the European institutions generally, or in a European context, I think the most important thing is to be interested in Europe and to be interested in other cultures, other people, other places, and to sort of maybe learn languages. This was my way in fact. I was interested, before I was interested in anything to do with, you know, Europe, institutionally or politically or systematically, I was interested in languages. I was interested in abroad. You know, France was there. I'd never been there, but I was curious to see what it was like. And then when I saw all this funny writing, I thought, blimey, I want to know and want to understand that. And so I went into languages. That's actually my study background, is in languages. And that took me towards wanting to get involved in a world which was international and European and so on, and you know, step by step. And then I did get interested in current affairs and in politics and so on, not as a partisan politician, but as someone who's just interested in how things work. And that took me in that direction. And I can't say there's a specific education that you should look to have. I mean, there are a lot of political scientists, of course, in this world. But as I say, I came out of languages in university, and then I worked in a bank for a while. And I took one of these competitions that come up occasionally for the European institutions, and I passed it. And I don't think I passed it because I had lots of very specific knowledge about, you know, how the legislative procedure works between the European Parliament and the European Council, and how many votes everyone has and all this. I think I passed it because I was interested enough to sort of answer questions in an interesting way and sort of say, you know, these are the big challenges, this is the way I think we should, or Europe should try and deal with them, and this kind of thing. So it's developing your awareness, your interest. It means reading about what's going on. And trying to have contact with the system somehow. And okay, so I was maybe not typical because I just came from the outside world and I just sort of landed suddenly, and I'd never had any contact with sort of the European institutional system before I started working there. So I was a little bit unusual because a lot of people around me had been around, you know. So maybe there are lots of other ways of getting in and starting to learn about it, like people work as maybe as an assistant to an MEP, or maybe they do a traineeship, and there are lots of traineeships available in the European institutions, both in Brussels and in Luxembourg, indeed, or in Estonia. You can do it in our office here. You know, you have to apply, you have to be taken, but that's something that's not a competition. You know, it's a lighter process. So if anyone's interested and they know they're interested in doing that already, then start looking at traineeships and things like that as a way of, firstly, actually finding out whether you're really interested, because maybe you get there and you think, oh God, I don't think I can stand this for the next 30 years. Or maybe you just love it and you want that, you know, and it motivates you even more. Ultimately, the system is one of these competitions. So if you want to sort of end up with this as your career, then you need to go into one of these competitions sooner or later and get through it, and then you can be recruited into one of the institutions and go from there.
But who did you want to become when you were a teenager, let's say?
Who did I want to become? Well, you know, everyone wants to be a pop star when they're 13, and I think I was the same as everybody else. I was one of these people who I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think there are quite a lot of people in that situation. I don't think, and it's sometimes a bit unfair to expect people to know what they want to do, and maybe now even more than before, because the job market is so much more complicated and distinct, and it's not like, you know, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be an accountant, or you can go and work in the local factory or the local shop or something like that. I mean, the range of things you can possibly do and the structures through which you can do them are so much more complicated. And I see this. I've mentioned my own sons several times. They're, just to tell you, they're 24 and 26, and they're in exactly this situation of like really looking for what their direction is, and it's very complicated. So I'm trying to remember what your original question was. It's like how you get your direction. You asked me what I wanted to do. So the job found me, really. I said I worked in a bank. I did that because, okay, I came out of university. I needed to live. I needed to earn some money. And at the time I came out of university, the banks were very easy to get into because it was boom time for that sort of industry, in the UK at least. And they said, we can take you abroad. You can work in Italy, which is of great interest to me. And that's what happened. But then I thought, this isn't really what I want to do with my life long term. And then this other opportunity came up. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. Let's give it a try. And often it's just that. You have to sort of, well, let's try it and see. I mean, why not? You know, it could work, it could not work. If I were there now, if I were kind of the age of my sons, I'd be saying to myself, you know, I want to do something creative. I want to be in a world that excites me, which I think is actually good and does something useful in the world. You know, I don't know if it would be possible, but I would lean towards, you know, the creative industries. But of course, everyone wants to work in the creative industries, and it's, you know, everyone wants to be in media or whatever. But I think that would attract me now if I were there.
Yeah.
Right.
I've done the next best thing. I went into an institution, like boring institution, you know, but then actually get to do the communication and the media, which is great.
Let's talk a little bit about time management as well.
Ooh.
I can imagine that your days are busy and you travel quite a lot. How do you manage such a busy day schedule?
I have people who help me manage my time, actually, I have to say, because as you've noticed, once I get talking about something, I can just carry on. So someone needs to say, now, hang on a minute, next thing is coming up. No, it's complicated in the sense that I do have a lot of meetings all the time. It's a very sort of structured thing, so I have to go into the office first thing. At the beginning of the week, in fact, I sit down with my team and we look at the week ahead and say, okay, there's this, and this all coming up. And so we need to prepare this, we need to prepare that. So perhaps we need to sort of get together to discuss subject A, which is being discussed on Wednesday, and then subject B on Thursday. We need to find a slot before that, discuss that, and make sure, you know, the position is clear, we know what we want, and that we can go in and argue our case, and, you know, maybe get the resources or get the decision or whatever it is that we want to get out of it. And then, so that's the sort of the day-to-day. Then, you know, there will be sort of fixed points, because if you work in the European Parliament, you live by a calendar of the European Parliament, which has weeks of work going on in Brussels, which is sort of committee work and a lot of political meetings, and sometimes we have to sort of support those in some way. And then once a month, there's a session, a plenary session in Strasbourg. Yeah. So my life now for years has been basically 3 weeks at home or at base and 1 week in Strasbourg. I say it's Monday to Thursday in Strasbourg in reality. And then on top of that, you know, and particularly now in this job, there are trips, there are things that, you know, okay, I want to go. It's important for me to go and see all of the offices, to meet everybody, make sure everyone's okay. And then, you know, there will be things to do. So I sort of land in Tallinn and say, okay, talk about having your time organized. I've been marched from one thing to another, but it's been a great program. So the stuff back home in Brussels, we, you know, tried to keep the calendar clear for those few days. So, you know, I get back on Monday and suddenly there's an accumulation of a few things that I've got to do very quickly. That'll happen. But it's manageable. But it's manageable with help.
But how do you manage your time, your personal life mixed with work?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's always been important to me to keep the two separate. I'm not someone who wants to take work home with me, even to the extent that, you know, I would rather stay a bit late in the office and go home later than go home and then do it at home, which is something my dad used to do sometimes. And I thought, that's a bit sad somehow. You know, there's the home and then there's the... Of course, then you get COVID and teleworking and life changes a lot. So, you know, that's now a new factor and we're sort of finding a new balance. But I think, you know, I do ring fence my own time and I want to do my own things in. And I hope that I've not been one of these people who lets the work take over their life. Although I'm lucky because a lot of my work I actually enjoy a lot and I don't mind the time it takes at all.
But it should be that way.
Yeah. But, you know, in fact, that's a really good point. Because, you know, some people, work is necessarily bad. You know, you're sitting there, you're bored, you're in the office, you're sort of doing your routine tasks and everything. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? So you get a job which you actually enjoy doing, gives you satisfaction. And for example, I've no problem on these for traveling, you know, for that to sort of go into a weekend or something, because it's interesting, it's satisfying, gives you some reward at the end of it all.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Satisfaction is the thing. Yeah. That's what it's all about now.
We have a tradition to ask 3 last questions in the end of our podcast that matches our this year's youth conference theme, which is, it is me who changes the world. So the first question is, what is the one thing you're doing today to make the world a better place?
Okay, it follows on quite well from our last point, because I do actually think that the best thing I'm doing for the world is what I'm doing in my job. And it's what I do when I'm out and about and meeting people, not, you know, colleagues, but meeting people from the outside world, from the real world. And occasionally you get to see how that works. I meet a lot of people as I travel around, and sometimes I go back to the same place later, maybe even a couple of years later, and someone will come up to me and said, "Hi, do you remember me? And I'm doing things now and it's great." And that's so satisfying. And I think that is doing good in the world.
Who is your biggest role model?
My biggest role model?
Yeah.
Now, it depends what you mean. I mean, we all have professional role models, and I had a boss once who was someone I would genuinely call a great man. I mean, but that's probably not the most interesting answer I could give. And I think if, you know, I've thought about who would you possibly ever like to be, and who do you really admire? And I mentioned before we started, a guy called Sir David Attenborough. Yeah. And I've always thought, wow, So he spent his whole life doing something that he loves, visibly loves doing it. He's an expert in it. He's studied it. He knows it back to front. So he has a great sort of basis to have his opinions. And now he is crusading at the age of, I think he's 80 or 90 or something. He's very old. He's been there my whole life, this guy. He's seeing climate change. He's seeing the effect through his work that this has, and he's standing up for what he really, really cares about. And he's a campaigner who cares, and he knows he's got this scientific basis and has the authority to talk about it. And I think we need more people like that, not people who know nothing about it, who just spout slogans, but people who know what they're talking about, but also have that charisma to communicate and make a difference. So, that is the kind of person I would really love to be.
Can you suggest any books, podcasts, films to teenagers to watch?
So I mentioned films earlier on. I'm a bit of a film guy, but they're classic films and they're kind of in black and white from the 1960s. And I'm thinking, do I really want? Is that the kind of thing I want to suggest? I don't know. We were talking about films actually a little bit earlier on with some colleagues here, and we talked about subjects that are important today, and one of them is migration. And then it reminded me of this film called The Terminal with Tom Hanks. Have you seen this? Where he's a kind of a guy from some strange republic somewhere with a funny name, speaks funny language. I mean, is it Kyrgyzstan or something? They invent a place, and he gets stuck in an airport, in a US airport, and he doesn't get into the country because he hasn't got papers. But they can't send him home because he hasn't got any papers to go home with. So it's kind of an emblematic figure of the person lost in the world, a kind of a refugee with nowhere to go. And I think it's a wonderful film because it's funny, and he works out how to survive living in an airport, which is also hilarious. And and it's a very human film. And in the end, he gets through. So I think that's a really nice film. It's not one of my ancient films. It's in colour and it's relatively recent. It's got Tom Hanks and everyone loves Tom Hanks. So that's the film.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
And do you want a podcast too?
Yeah, of course.
Well, apart from this one, which of course is the podcast, I've been listening to a podcast for years, and it's an American one. And if anyone's interested in American politics, and I think a lot of people are, and I am, and it's not our job, but I'm just interested. It's called the Slate Political Gabfest. I don't know if you know about, it's a publication called Slate in the US, and they have this podcast, and it's been going for years. It's one of the very early ones. And once I was in Washington, I even met them.
Oh, wow.
And just really interesting. It tells you what you need to know, And so I listen to that quite religiously.
Podcasts are great to listen when you're, for example, flying or traveling somewhere.
Yeah, traveling, and this one, it comes out on a Thursday night, so I often listen to it at the weekend as I'm sort of just around the house doing stuff that you have to do,
Thanks, Stephen, that you found time to come to our podcasts. We had a really good time.
And so did I, yeah, great.
Oh. And for all our listeners, every Thursday, a new episode of our podcast will be released.